A lot of times people think about disability, they think about donating wheelchairs, they think about providing services, a lot of clinical things. And our job, at the end of the day, we may provide some of those services, but the ultimate objective is for them to know that they're loved and worthy of it by themselves, by God, by others.
Welcome to Unlikely Gifts, a podcast for anyone looking for hope amid difficult circumstances. Life can be beautiful, unexpected, and at times profoundly difficult. It helps to hear from others who have grown from life's challenges and joys. That's why Leonard Mbonani and Cynthia Bauer are sharing how their experiences working with families impacted by disabilities in Africa have taught them about life's most amazing gifts and its hardest tragedies. These are Unlikely Gifts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unlikely Gifts. I'm Frank Boswell, and I'm joined by Cynthia Bauer and Leonard Mbonani, the co-founders and directors of an organization called Kupenda for the Children. Kupenda is a Swahili word for love, and the organization exists to replace harmful beliefs surrounding disability to those that improve lives. Cindy and Leonard, I hope you are both doing well. How did you two, meet up from two different continents, two different worlds? Just tell us briefly how you met.
Kupenda was a thought a long time ago, before it was called anything. I felt really strongly that I was being called to do something with children with disabilities in Africa. Or first, I was called to Africa, and then I did my research for my wildlife degree on the coast of Kenya. And the year before, I'd seen children and people begging on the streets that had disabilities. And that's when I had learned that people with disabilities didn't have the same opportunities that other people I'd known had. And because I was born without my left hand, it really struck me when my professors told me that if I had been born in Kenya, especially on the coast, I might have been killed because they might have thought I was a curse or just a burden as well, because they would not believe that I could do anything productive. And so I didn't know how to manifest that particular feeling or calling until I was doing my research on the coast of Kenya, studying this strange animal called the golden-rumped elephant shrew. It's the size of like a small rabbit. It has a yellow spot on its back. And every day on my way to the forest where I was studying this animal, I passed a school called the Getty Home for Physically Disabled Children. And I asked my field assistant, Willie, if I could visit sometime. And he said, actually, the person who started the school is my cousin Leonard. And so I visited one day. Significant to me, not so much to Leonard. It happened to be the 4th of July. And I had decided to take the 4th of July off from my research that day and went to go visit the school. And that's when Leonard introduced me to 15 children with disabilities that were all meeting in a storage shed. And I was just a 20-something-year-old graduate student. I actually just asked Leonard recently, like, what in the world did you think of me? Like, did you really think anything would happen from that? Because I was just I didn't know what I was doing. But we paid for a few kids to go to school, and that was the beginning of Kupenda. Leonard could maybe say what he thought when he ran into this young grad student, because Leonard's old enough to be my dad. And I was just trying to find my way.
So, Leonard, you were involved in working with disabilities before you ever met Cindy, right?
Okay, thank you. I had already been working in the field, working for children with disabilities, but it so happened that I was in Kilifi, which is the headquarters of Kilifi County. By then, it was still Kilifi District, but I had been transferred to another station, which is Gede. And I was working as the assessment teacher for children with disabilities. My work was to assess children, refer them for medication or refer them for school placement, counseling parents. And I was operating from Gedi. This is when I saw this young lady. By then she was very young, as she has already indicated. She was about 20, 23 there. I saw her with my cousin, Willie. They came into my office. We knew each other. Then I just told her what I was really doing for the children. And it is from there that she piqued the interest. We had an appointment where we went to visiting a child But I still remember very well what happened when we went into that home. One of the boys by the name Charles Shida, I'll always remember, had just been sent home because of non-payment of the boarding fees. But on seeing us arriving at the home with Cindy, this is what the boy did. Instead of coming towards us, he went running into his house, picked his school bag and uniform, and he thought we had come to collect this boy and take him to school. And I think it is from there that we started working together as a team. And as she has already said, we started with a very small number. And from there, we continued communicating, helping one another to serve those children. Up to now, we are a big organization serving thousands of children from a very small number.
So was there some point at which you said, you know what, we need to make an organization? I mean, you had a job, Cindy, right? What about those poor crews?
Yeah, both Leonard and so I went back and I ended up getting a job working for the Army Environmental Center in Maryland, which is how I got to know you, Frank, and Lauren and Pat. I moved to Maryland after that. And Leonard we were both working full time and doing this at the same time. I think that for me, and maybe for Leonard too, but let Leonard speak for himself. I think that there's a reason why, and you also probably, Frank, as a church planter, I don't know that people in our positions could be very detail oriented. Otherwise, we wouldn't do what we're doing. Because I just like, all right, well, we'll just start doing this without really thinking it through with all the details. I think we would have been frozen and not continued on. But we're like, yeah, let's just take this on. And I think that I didn't really even think of it as an organization or anything at first, until when I came back from Kenya that time when I met Leonard, and my uncle had asked me to come speak at his church. He was a pastor, about what I was doing in Kenya. And he's like, well, what's the name of your organization? And I'm like, what are you talking about? What's the name? I don't have an organization. And so he asked me to come up with a name. I'm like, okay. So a friend of mine and I just like went through a Swahili dictionary looking at different words. And so technically I came up with Kupenda. I don't even know if I asked your permission, Leonard, about what that was. I think that was just because it wasn't anything official at the time. And then a few years later, when I was actually working in Maryland, I remember talking to someone. I was trying to find other organizations that would do what we were doing, and I couldn't find any at the time. And I remember talking to an organization, I think it was called the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability or something like that.
Yeah,
And I think I said something to them, and I said, yeah, something, I think they said something like, you should just start an organization. I'm like, really? Like, yeah, sometimes that's just what you have to do. And so I did in 2003. We became an official nonprofit in the US, and it was officially a community-based organization in Kenya, and then an NGO in 2008, but it's under a separate name called Kuhenza.
Wow. So let me ask one other question. When you say there was no other organization that was doing what you were doing, what is that thing?
I think that the thing that I wanted, or at least trying to figure out, because at the time it was what, 1999, 2000 at the time. And the Disability Act of Kenya did not become finalized till 2003. So there was not a lot happening for disability on the coast that we knew of. I mean, now I know there's a lot of other international organizations. I'm not sure what development they were in at the time, but it seems like there was a worldwide movement happening around the same time. A lot of people were being sparked to get involved in this kind of thing. But I think I wanted to find someone to help take care of the kids that I had met to pay for their school fees. That was the original thought. Kupenda has definitely changed to be much more than that. We're more focused now on working with community leaders to change that negative belief system around disability.
Sure.
So that they're more doing the support.
So Leonard, you're heading up this school, the Getty School, is that correct?
No, I was not heading the Getty School. I had helped to establish the school, but I had a small office, which was the assessment office by then. And as she has said, that was way back in 2000, somewhere there. But come 2003, I decided to leave the Ministry of Education to go and work with Kenya Medical Research Institute. And this is the time I told Cindy that I'm sorry, I'm quitting the ministry. And I remember she told me, okay, fine, I have no problem with that, but let's remain in touch. And I went to work with Camry, but in 2004, and maybe Cindy has forgotten, she did not come to Kenya. Instead, Andy, who is a brother, came to Kenya, but he brought me a small handwritten note, which said, Leonard, in future, we are thinking of employing you full time. I still have that piece of paper up to now. And it is from there that now my mind was thinking, oh, what is this? Am I going to really leave Camry? You remember Camry was a big organization, and I was wondering, I left the Ministry of Education. Now I have joined the Camry. I leave Camry again. What will happen? But there was a turning point somewhere as I was working with Camry when I realized that every morning I take my equipment or assessment tools, go and sit with a child for 3 hours, get all that information, bring it to the office for research purposes. Then maybe in another 6 months again, I'm seated with the same child for another 3 hours, reassessing. But in the long run, there is nothing like rehabilitation. So it's like you are not of any help to the child. You have just taken that information for research purposes. And I said, what is this? I need to be giving services to these children, interventional services to these children. So when this idea of forming an organization came, I said, wow, now I think I'm going to realize my dream that I become a rehabilitator than a research. And that's how we started as a CBO in Kenya. And on the other side, it was already an NGO, that is in America.
Wow. Well, it's fascinating how all these threads come together. What is Swahili your native language, Leonard? No.
My native language is both Kiswahili and Kigiriama.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious about the word Kupenda. In translation, there's usually not just one word that translates a word, or is there? Are there other words that you could use to translate Kupenda?
I think that, Leonard, tell me if this is correct. This is what we've been telling people for many years now, is the word Kupenda is a form of the word love, but it's the action word love. It means to love, actually. It's not the noun, it's the verb. So, and it's a constant, the thing that I love about the word Kupenda and the way that it's actually the form of the word love that is a constant state of loving. So an action of that, which I think is a beautiful, I mean, I learned it after we'd named it that, but I think that it's pretty fitting. Is that right, Leonard?
You are very right. In fact, people should not confuse this word, because when we say Kupenda, it's a process, it's a continuous, it has no end. You are showing that passion without any limitations or any ending.
So what do people I guess in Africa, how do they respond when they hear that word and know that that represents your work, your organization? But I'm not quite sure what I'm asking, but in our cultural context, to name something love sounds audacious. I don't say that critically, but it's a bold statement. And I just wonder how that is heard and received there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, in Kenya, many times when we are in the coastal region, we use kuhenza, which is the Kigiriama word still meaning kupenda or love. And what we have observed when people hear about this name or they hear about kupenda, they really associate us with people who are really who are caring, people who have the compassion, people who are always out to give services that maybe others are missing.
Wow. And Cindy, do you get any feedback on this side as you? Well, they don't know the name Kupenda. It doesn't have the same cultural resonance.
It doesn't have the same cultural resonance, no. And I think that, the word, and when we define the word, it helps us to explain to people why why we exist, and what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, I think when we think about the human experience, part of that, and one of the biggest parts of that, is to be and to give love. And so a lot of times people think about disability, they think about donating wheelchairs, they think about providing services, a lot of clinical things. And even in the development world, even in international circles, it still seems to have a lot of clinical focus, as opposed to the thing that is the most challenging for most people with disabilities, is that acceptance and in society, and that love of family, of others, and even like the love of themselves, because so many people have been told that they're not worthy. And our job, at the end of the day, we may provide some of those services like wheelchairs and everything else, but the ultimate objective is for them to know that they're loved and worthy of it by themselves, by God, by others.
So you've said that in some places in Kenya, children with disabilities are actually viewed as being cursed by God. Is that correct?
I'm going to let Leonard answer that more.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy, as we say over here.
Yeah, and it's weird for me anytime I'm there. And even just recently, I was in Kenya just a couple weeks ago in a workshop, and I said I was told that if I was born in Kenya, I might have been killed for being born without my left hand. And I said, is that true? And like, to see all the head nods, yes, is always a little weird to say like, yeah, we would have killed you. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
no
That's so.
question. Wouldn't even had to have a committee meeting. That's pretty sobering.
Yeah,
So
it's true. In Kenya, we have those beliefs that disability could be caused by a curse, could be caused by witchcraft. And in the olden days, and even today in some few places, children born with disabilities are killed at a very early stage, maybe when he is 1 or 2 days. However, things are keeping on changing because the government arm is long. It's like the government is everywhere. So when you happen to kill such a child, the government will track you and they'll get hold of you. So it's true that we had those negative feelings and bad practices to children with disabilities.
So if I'm one of these children in Kenya, I'm aware of this at some point, I guess. What is it like for them to, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what happens in our country when you are born with a very severe disability, you will be eliminated even before the 3rd day of your birth. So you never know that this is what has been planned for. But if you have a disability and you have survived maybe to 1 year, 2 years, it's not likely that you will be eliminated unless the parents are really having it very difficult or a lot of difficulties, maybe like feeding you, maybe you have a problem to on how to be fed, then they may be thinking on those lines, and that will be done quietly. Then they may give a false reason. But as I've said, it is never happening much today, just because when you do that, your neighbor there is going to report you to the area administrator, and an action will be taken upon you. So that trend is not there anymore. And if it happens, then it is done secretly.
But I think maybe the attitudes around it, Leonard, maybe, but how does a person feel to think that they're cursed? Yeah. Or that, do they know?
Attitudes are there, and the attitudes are made by the community, and they will at a time make sure that you are aware that I am not wanted in this community, I'm a curse in this community, my parents must have done something wrong that led to me to be born the way I am. And you'll find that you are being discriminated in so many forums. That is when now you realize, oh, so this is how the community is treating me. And in the long run, you end up even accepting that I am not a normal person, I'm not worthy, because the community has always been telling you that you're not worthy, this is what you are, and so on. So it happens, particularly as far as attitudes are concerned.
I
And
can't.
I want to make sure that's also not just people understand that that's not limited only to Kenya or countries of lower income. That's also true in the US, that people with disabilities, people who don't fit what we consider normal, whatever that, I don't know who the normal person is out there, but I think that that's also true in the United States in different ways. I think we expect perfection. So even when my mom will say that narrate my birth, she said she happened to have been sedated when I was born. And so my dad knew about me before she did. And when she woke up and saw the faces of my dad and the doctors, her first question was to ask if I had died. So the fact that I was born without a hand made her think that I had died, because were wondering, like people were upset, obviously, because what is that first question they ask? 10 fingers, 10 toes. That's not
Yeah,
the case for me. And so my mom always narrates my birth and the feelings of how does it feel to have a child born without a hand. Keep in mind, they didn't have sonograms back in 1974. She said, imagine what it's like when you give birth to your first child and the what you feel about that, the overwhelming feelings of love, and also imagine that your child has their hand amputated. She's like, now imagine those feelings happening at the same time. So I think that that was a really great way to articulate what that experience is like. But I think that, I think my mom said her pastor told her to be very careful when she tried to explain to me God's role in my being born without a hand, because it could really affect my relationship with God. And, I think that there's all the concerns about how would other people view that kind of thing. So I think, and even my dad at that time thought if he prayed and fasted long enough, that God would give me a hand, and that's how God's glory would be revealed. So I just always think it's important to know that that belief and those thoughts aren't limited just to other countries. It's here too.
Well, I keep thinking of that story with Jesus and the disciples come upon a man born blind, and the disciples want to have an academic debate about whether the man sinned or whether his parents sinned. But somebody must have sinned. Somebody must have done something wrong that accounts for this. And of course, Jesus. Now, in that case, he was healed, but I think the meaning of the story goes beyond that. Jesus changes the conversation from what went wrong here to what are we to do? How can God be glorified through this? So Kupenda is an action word. It's not an academic debate word. It's a let's do something word. So this is very, very compelling. What is it like for one of these children to come into contact with you? I mean, it must be profound for them in some way.
from my experience, the children that have gone through my hands and for a long time, whenever they meet me, they give a very, very touchy testimony. I remember of a boy called George when he was at Get a Special, and I said, George, you can be a pastor. That day there was a pastor's workshop, and about 20 pastors that had attended that workshop. But I told George in front of the 20 pastors that, George, it's possible for you to be a pastor, and just like these pastors here, all you need to be done or to be given is the opportunity. And I think it happened maybe 15 years back or 20 years ago, but George has not forgotten that story up to today. And whenever he's giving a testimony in a pastor's workshop, he will always quote that story that it's Leonard who changed my attitude about my belief about disability. When he said, I can be a very important person, I can even be a pastor. And it is from that time that I changed my feeling and my perception about disability towards myself. And I felt, yes, I can do anything given that opportunity.
Wow. So, pardon me, once again, I'm thinking of this blind man by the road, and he's listening to the disciples, and then he hears this other voice talking about God and his value. And if I were the blind man, I'd be thinking, that's the voice I want to listen to. These other guys, not so much. What is the most gratifying part of this work that you have in showing love to these children?
Yeah, for the many years that I've been working with these children, I have got a lot of satisfaction when I see many of the children that we have saved their lives. I remember some of the children that we saw in a very bad situation, and we were able to rescue them. And today those children are living. And there are several of them that we have met, others just giving them the care, others referring to the hospital for surgery or for any medication. And it makes me feel so proud to see that a life that would have been terminated is still here on earth. And I feel, oh, this is really satisfying me. So the saving of life matters a lot to me. And also the other thing that really satisfies me is to see quite a number of parents and their families and community have also changed their attitudes towards people with disability. I know it's not 100%, but when I compare from the time we started and the time and today, I see a very big difference. So it really gives me that satisfaction that, oh, surely, whatever we are doing is really changing the lives of people with disabilities.
And
Cindy,
one of the things that I get so much excitement for is when one of the kids that we've supported in one way or another end up deciding that they are then going to support other people with disabilities. So when I was just in Kenya a couple of weeks ago, you know, it was the kind of thing that just keeps you going. I was a young man named Nasir, who I knew from a long time ago, who had cerebral palsy, fairly mildly, but he went to the Getty Special School, which was that first school that Leonard had helped to start out of, you know, we have 25 schools that kids go to now. But this young man, when we went to go and interview him, he's finished with his high school education. And because he'd gone to this school called the Getty Special School, where children with physical disabilities, as well as children who were deaf, went there, a lot of the kids who had physical disabilities would learn sign language because they were connecting with their friends who were deaf. And so Nasir had said he wanted to become a sign language interpreter. And that's what he wanted to do to help other people. And Kenya is in a big shortage of sign language interpreters. And it was very interesting to even just observe in that short conversation, a stigma reduction right before our eyes, because his brother was next to him and said, "Can he even do that?" Basically saying he didn't think he could because of some of the way his hands were affected by his cerebral palsy. And we happened to have our program manager who's a sign language teacher with us. And so she signed to him, he signed back, he interpreted for her, and we just showed him right there on the spot what he could do. And the brother's like, okay, now I know he can do this. And I think that to me is the most, because when you invest in one child, you invest that love and that care in one child, then they go and they give it to others. And I think that is the coolest thing for me to see.
Well, just one of those stories would get me out of bed in the morning. That's wonderful. What's challenging? I'm really thinking, I know when you get involved in work like this, parts of it are harder than you think it'll be. I just wonder, what are the big challenges that you deal with?
There are many challenges, but I would say as an organization, we have our own limitations. And sometimes you feel like, oh, I cannot provide all the services that this child or this family needs. So sometimes you feel like, oh, what can I do? This is the end. I have nothing more to provide. That is also something which is also very challenging to me. Above all, you remember we are living in a community, maybe the NGOs that came earlier were always giving things to these families. So there is that tendency of these families having a lot of over expectation from the organization. So sometimes you cannot provide and they are always feeling like, oh, why? So that is also a very big challenge. Above all, it's like, as you work for these children for many, many years, it's like you are taking the burdens of all these children and their families and you are putting them on your chest. So you feel overwhelmed all the time because from this scenario to another scenario, And all these scenarios are demanding, they need your input and so on. So you carry all these burdens with you.
Wow. Wow. What about you, Cindy?
Well, I think that's such a great description that Leonard gave of taking on the burdens, and just like that's what love is, isn't it? It's to take on the burdens of our brothers, because I think this is in First John, like what is love but if you see your brother in need and don't give to them, like how can the love of God be in your heart? And I think that's love is hard, whether it be in this kind of work or in a marriage or anything. And the thing is, sometimes I think we often have to push through. And I think that's really what it means, is because when we get to the other side, when we push through in the real difficult times, it ends up being worth it most of the time. But the hard thing for us, and Leonard and I have talked about this, we couldn't tell you all the names and the faces of the children who have benefited from our work. But Leonard especially can tell you the names and the faces of the children who have died. And I think
Mm.
for both of us, every time we lose a child, or even recently there was a parent that was killed because of discriminatory beliefs. And those are really hard times. Like even that first child that Leonard mentioned at the beginning, Cherishita, he was actually the first child that died that I had known. I know there's many more, and he died because of an epileptic seizure that wasn't medicated correctly. So it was something that was also preventable. And it happened to be around a time I was going to be coming to Kenya anyway, and I was able to go to his funeral. But I think also, as hard as that is to lose kids, it also, every time Leonard and I talk about what can we learn from this? What can we learn for this? Because we don't want to waste the pain. We don't want to waste the loss. We don't want to waste the sorrow. And so at Sheeta's funeral, I was able to speak, and it was important to me to do it in Swahili. So I'm I'm definitely not fluent in Swahili. I had them write it, I had them translate it for me. I can read Swahili very well. So but I think we've even learned that to love is to love even in death. Um, and I think that Leonard has done such an amazing job on the ground that when we lose a child, we also help to support the family in the funeral expenses. And there's always a member of our team present at those services that shares. And I think that that's hard, but also there's something beautiful about, I think anything that's worth it is hard. And I think both of us are probably, someone asked me once, like, how do you do this work without it breaking your heart? I'm like, you make an assumption that it doesn't break our hearts. If it stopped breaking our hearts, we need to stop doing the work. On the day that it no longer breaks our heart, we shouldn't be doing this. And so I think that it just motivates us to keep going, because then we have to remind ourselves of the kids that it did work for. The children, we have to remind ourselves of the Nasirs and the other children, because it shows us that we what God is calling us to do can work, and that what we're doing, especially when we're working with communities and community leaders and pastors and changing belief systems around curses and healing and that kind of thing, that people that it actually works. And so there's just more people who need to know about it, because those cases, we don't need to, when we know what can happen when we lose too. But I think, of course, from my standpoint, I'm also always concerned about, what if we don't get the funding to pay for all these people that work for us? We now have a staff of 20 plus people on the ground. And so, especially as we look at things like recession, those are the kinds of things on my mind too, is like, can we keep doing this? Who am I to think that we can be funding an organization like this? Or especially as we're talking to larger organizations and partnership, we're just like, what? Yeah, sometimes it's that what do they call it? Imposter syndrome. Like, who do I think I am that we can do this kind of thing? But somehow we just it keeps happening. And I think it's always important to remind people that people think we're something special, but we're not. We're just regular people with the regular problems of everybody else. And sometimes we have an extra burden on us, but I think we're not superheroes. And I think that other people need to remember that because we're not superheroes, they can do what we're doing too, in
For
some way
sure.
or another. Yeah.
Mm.
Hey, I'm really back on this thing with these little children who've died. They're not here. They're not, I don't know. There's something hearing you talk about it, how much they matter because they're on your hearts. Those lives were very, very significant. And if that's not love, I don't know what is. And I was going to ask you how maybe your views of love have changed or how what you've learned, but I think you've done a beautiful job of just wrapping that up, Cindy. And I think maybe we ought to leave it there for now, because I know we want to come back and we want to explore more of the dimensions of this and what it means for our lives, because everybody's hurting, everybody needs to be loved, and everybody needs to love. And so I really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks for taking the time to share that. And Leonard, stay well. Cindy, stay out of trouble. And I will look forward to our next time together.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.